Outreach Director for the California Cannabis Industry Association. For this final panel, we're going to be discussing the vape illness situation, which really is a very nuanced situation that covers everything from counterfeit to trademark to health to policy, education, and what kind of reforms we're looking for. So I am thrilled to have such an amazing panel of experts coming from very different fields. So first I'm going to introduce everyone, and then I'm going to ask them to say a little bit about why they got involved in cannabis. So first we have Emily Richardson of Canalysis. Then we have Ian Stewart with Wilson Elser. Next to him, we have Alex Friedman, formerly of the LA Department of Cannabis Regulations, who just left in the last couple of weeks and has started Friedman Strategic Consulting. Next to Alex, we have Nicole Phyllis, who is with Davis Wright Tremaine. So if each of you could just give a little background on why you got involved in cannabis.
Hi there. I've been in the cannabis testing industry for 10 years now. And I first got into this sort of at the birth of the testing industry and sort of the midway point through the medical cannabis industry in California. Just because when I found out you could actually test products and see actually how potent they were, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I'd definitely been a victim of the cannabis club brownie situation where you don't really have, you just have no idea what you were getting. And how potent it was and what was inside it. So when I learned that that was a possibility, I thought that was super cool and haven't looked back since. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Hi everybody. My name is Ian Stewart. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Dean. People call us Dean, so we answer to either one. Of the Wilson Elser cannabis team. I got involved sort of by accident a few years ago. Pre-2015, one of the only, I spent a lot of my time advising insurance companies. One of the only markets at that time was the Lloyd's market out of London, and we were doing some work with them in California. And my firm at that point was not ready to really, visibly be in the cannabis space. It wasn't until about 2016 that kind of chains were loosened up and we were able to formally form our team. Since then, it's been such a great privilege to work with many of the carriers in the space, and then also advise on product liability and risk management issues in the cannabis space.
So I got into the cannabis industry just by chance. About 2 years ago, I was working at the LA City Attorney's Office, helping to oversee minimum wage enforcement. Didn't even know if cannabis was spelled with one N and two. And they said we need an attorney to help write all the cannabis laws for the city of LA and help establish the licensing system. And I said, that sounds like an opportunity of a lifetime, and it was. And I did that for the last 2 years. It was fascinating, frustrating, and everything in between. And so about 2 weeks ago, I left the city of Los Angeles, the government, to start my own consulting firm to work with clients in LA to help them navigate this very complicated licensing system that I helped either make so complicated or try to make it simpler, and so just a very exciting time, and it's much more fun to be on this side of the industry than on the other side.
I will say I did have to ask Alex if anyone had intimidated him not to come here and speak and give us.
So hi, my name is Nicole Phyllis. I am an attorney at Davis Wright Tremaine. I came to the cannabis industry from a First Amendment background. Davis Wright is known for First Amendment and free speech work, and I became really fascinated about the intersection of cannabis-related speech and labeling and advertising. So I took my experience both from a First Amendment background and from defending consumer class actions for false advertising and mislabeling, and brought those skills here in the cannabis industry. I'm so grateful to be here with everyone.
Thanks, everyone. So I'd first like to start with what we know. Ultimately, at this point, we're addressing this as Vape, which is vape-associated pulmonary illnesses. The CDC, the CDFA, or the CDPH, and the FDA have been putting out regular updates. As of October 11th, which was the last date that CDC did give an update, we currently have 1,299 cases of vape nationwide. In California, we have 104. In California, we've had 2 deaths. We've also had 21 deaths nationwide. At this point, the California Department of Public Health has been submitting all sorts of evidence. They've been doing patient interviews. They've been submitting whatever evidence they have to the FDA for testing. This is very slow to come back, for multiple reasons. Some of the patients had already discarded whatever they were vaping, but also being a Schedule I drug, even getting this product for testing to Washington, D.C. requires many levels of packaging and security review. So at this point in California, we can't necessarily say that there have been no cases related to vapes purchased in the regulated market. But at this point, it still appears that majority of cases in California and nationwide have been related to vape cartridges purchased on the illicit market. With that, I kind of want to evolve into the conversation about the vape crisis. Is it one vape crisis, or are there multiple crises here that need to be addressed separately? And Ian, I'm hoping you can kind of start that conversation.
Sure. Well, I think hopefully everyone has seen this sort of phenomenon happening in the media over the last couple months, where you'll open up a story and they'll start talking about acute and sudden respiratory failure. Primarily in males, primarily skews a little younger, primarily skews toward THC products. And then they'll say something about flavored e-nicotine, Juul issues where they're marketing toward children. Those are two, in my opinion, two completely separate issues. There have been no reported cases of flavored e-nicotine products because of the flavoring harming anyone in an acute way. And likewise, there have been no reports of regulated THC products coming out of a responsible, commercial market that have been targeted toward children, right? So those are 2 issues. And then there's a third issue, which is the long-term exposure. And this is something that affects both the e-cigarette vape market, and it affects the THC market. And we don't know 20 years from now what type of long-term exposures there are going to be, and what type of warnings need to be generated by the industry as sort of that state of the art becomes known. So I think there's really 3 what can I think be called public health crises. One would be the acute sudden onset of injuries. It's the targeting of children with flavors, and then this sort of unknown about vaping.
Thank you. And so I'm wondering, and I'll start to go through, each of you to give you an opportunity to speak. How are you currently advising any of your cannabis businesses in what to do during these times of unknowns?
Well, I think from the policy side, in LA, we just had a council member introduce a motion to ban all vape products in the city of Los Angeles for a year, and then say no new vape products can come on the market after that unless they're individually approved by city council. Now, that's just an insane, horrible idea for many reasons. It's going to send customers to the illicit market. It's not going to solve the problem. It's not evidence-based, but it goes to show that, when these public health crises happen, the policymakers react. And if they're not informed, they're going to make very bad decisions. So it's about starting to educate the elected officials who are going to ultimately call the shots about the cannabis industry, the difference between the licensed and illicit market, especially when it comes to public health. Because in my experience of the last couple of years dealing at least with city council in LA, is they don't understand the industry at all. They don't understand the products that are coming out of the industry, the difference between the licensed industry and the unlicensed industry. And so it's really upon the industry and our clients to go to the elected officials and make sure they understand that, so you don't get handed these bad policies. There's also a lot of elected officials who still don't like the cannabis industry on a personal or moral level. And they will use these types of public health crises, even if there's no link to the licensed market, to try to roll back the expansion of the licensed market. And that can move very, very quickly unless if there's not support and understanding broadly across the elected offices at the local and state level.
So, when I've talked with my clients, I kind of have approached it from the perspective of what kind of advertising is truthful and substantiated. And that's the standard California Business and Professions Code that applies to all cannabis advertising. So if you're going to be making statements about your vape products, it needs to be truthful and it needs to be substantiated. Right now, we do not know, and the CDC has said this, we do not know the cause of these injuries. We have information about correlation statistics. The majority of cases appear to be related to illicit or illegal products, but we don't know what exactly is causing the injuries. So I think, and I have counseled clients, that a good approach is to tell consumers, this is how you get information about our product, this is truthful and reliable information about our product, this is how you can help educate yourself about what you're putting into your body. And I think that type of approach is your approach that says X is safe, Y is not, is the type of behavior we need to demonstrate to have credibility with consumers and also have credibility with lawmakers.
Thank you. And misinformation has clearly been a problem across the board. I will say, as communications director of CCIA, this is eating up 24 hours of my days right now, and has since the very inception. And it's really media trying to sensationalize. They don't like to hear when cannabis is doing the right things, being proactive, testing, child-resistant packaging, how we're really tending to further legitimizing the industry. They don't like to hear that. They want the tragedies, and that tends to be what goes out there. So Emily, I'm wondering if you can talk about how the industry is being proactive, and from a testing lab standard, what you guys have found and what has led you into further action.
Yeah, so sort of as soon as this crisis hit the news and the media, the regulated industry mobilized and requested one of the early additives that's been implicated. Again, we still don't know exactly, there's no smoking gun, so to speak, but we have seen vitamin E acetate come up as we know it's problematic in terms of inhalation, and it has been found in some of these products. So the regulated industry mobilized and really requested that we start offering this sort of testing so that they could see it, prove that it's not in their products, or actually, and really make sure it isn't. Most of them believed it wasn't, but they wanted to see and wanted to prove that their products were safe. So we recently conducted a study of 112 different regulated vape products, and none of them contained vitamin E acetate. So all of these products were sourced from the licensed, legal, regulated market. And what we also know about this market is that aside from vitamin E, which isn't a required test, California has some of the strictest testing standards in the world, really, for cannabis products. I tell people all the time, cannabis is the cleanest consumer good you can buy in the state of California. Nothing.
Switch your body lotion today.
Yeah.
Cannabis lotion.
Really, it's unprecedented the standards that cannabis products are held to. So we're already testing for things like, we have a long list of pesticides. We're testing for heavy metals, residual solvents, microbial contaminants, things like that. So, I think what our study showed was that the regulated market is working, and while we still don't have all of the information, typically reports from the people that have become sick is that they purchased their products in the illicit market. I think probably, usually those numbers are also a little underreported as well. People are afraid to admit that. Or I think in some cases, people don't even know that they were purchased at an illicit dispensary. Some of these dispensaries do a really good job of making themselves look legitimate, and these counterfeit products look so legitimate sometimes that the manufacturers themselves even have trouble differentiating between a counterfeit fake that's put in front of them and one of their own legitimate products. So I think it's really, it goes to show that the demand for vitamin E acetate testing was driven by the industry. This was not requested by the state or any government agency. This was the industry wanting to show transparency and that they believed, fully that they're creating safe products. And I think so far the data shows that they are. So.
NBC came out with a report roughly 2 weeks ago, and a lot of it was focused in LA. So I'd like to get all of your reactions to the report. But what they did is they purchased illicit vapes from delivery services in Los Angeles. I believe that was 15. They also purchased regulated vapes. They went to CannaSafe and they tested all of these vape cartridges. 13 of the 15 that were purchased from the illicit market came back with high levels of vitamin E acetate, as well as heavy metals, pesticides, and toxins. Those tested in the regulated market came back completely clean the whole way through. One of the points that was brought up in this is that many folks in Southern California specifically live in banned areas. This report also touched on the counterfeit market specific to Los Angeles and highlighted a 12-block radius where they could purchase every piece of counterfeit product, from the cartridge to the packaging to fake testing labels that are identical to California's labels. The counterfeit market is morphing incredibly right now, incredibly fast. So I'm wanting to know, one, what you thought about the report. Two, what is the real counterfeit market looking like down here in LA? And is banning and prohibition actually tending to public safety and public health, or is it doing the opposite by not giving consumers access to the regulated market?
Within LA specifically, if you're banning vapes, obviously you're sending them to the illicit market, and the city of LA has proved incapable of really making a true dent in the illicit market. And the challenge has been for the last 2 years is they're not ignorant of it. They're not just sitting there saying, no, it doesn't exist. They know you can go on Weed Maps and see all these illegal dispensaries. You can go really a few blocks from City Hall and buy all these products. The challenge is the city has traditionally had one very good way of stopping people from doing things they don't want, and that's arresting them and putting them in jail. Beyond that, it's very hard for the city to actually stop people from doing something if they have a very strong incentive to engage in that, and there's minimal consequences. So for the city of LA to raid a dispensary, do enforcement action, it costs about $75,000 when you talk about all the police labor costs, executing the warrant, seizing the property. And if those stores can open up in 2 days later, 3 days later, a week, however long, that money that the government spent was really, it didn't do anything. And so there's a large hesitancy for the government for the city to put those resources into something that's not going to actually have the effect. So for something like the 12-block radius where you can find all these products, the challenge becomes the city has to adapt to finding new ways to take enforcement. These operators are probably violating all sorts of state and federal laws, but they're not state and federal laws that the LAPD or the LAFD or building and safety would normally enforce, or maybe not even legally have the ability to enforce. And so everyone's trying to figure out, it's like, well, we know they're doing all these things illegal, but who's responsible for doing that? So the city and the state, I don't think, don't have the answer to that yet. And so the worst thing that can be done right now is to send more consumers to that market that we don't even know how to get rid of.
Well, and in terms of what do you do about it outside of LA, I think history can maybe educate us a little bit. When you think about prohibition, in 1925, 100% of the alcohol sold in this country was legal. By 1940, less than 1% of the alcohol sold in this country was legal. And today, when was the last time you saw a bootleg product in alcohol products? I mean, it's not to say that Uncle Joe doesn't make some moonshine or something like that. That doesn't exist, right? And it was really it was a combination of enforcement and brands that the public came to want to buy over the sort of dangerous, low quality bootleg products. So I'm not sure how that translates into what we do now going forward, but I think it does, say it's got to be some combination of enforcement and growth of a regulated, trusted, reliable, effective, legal market.
One resource that I've seen put out some really excellent content on this is the Marijuana Policy Project, and they put out a report specifically specifically on short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals related to the regulation of vaping and how do we make this, how do we help consumers get more knowledge about what they're consuming, how do we make this a safer product. And I think, short-term, they are strongly opposed to prohibition for exactly the reasons that we've discussed here. Long-term, I think, they're very focused on obviously ending prohibition on the federal level, but in the midterm, and I think this is what we really need to focus legislatively on, is addressing some of the concerns about testing and integrating some of these things that aren't currently being tested for into our regulatory landscape, helping consumers really get that information, also making it easier, generally speaking, for testing and R&D in the industry, which is a huge problem to this day. And I know legislative priorities abound, but it's a really good report. It's a digestible read, and I think for folks who are looking to have their voice heard on this particular issue, it sets forth sustainable goals going forward.
And what can brands do to protect themselves? Because right now it seems like all the major brands, whether it's Kingpen, TKO, Cookies, they seem to be the major brands that are being counterfeited. And at what point are they liable for counterfeit products that really, match the authentic products? Are there steps that brands can take to protect themselves right now?
Well, in terms of counterfeiting, companies do have a potential duty under the law to stop counterfeiting. But the question is, how far does it go in terms of the potential for a jury verdict? And if you look at there's a case that was filed up in Washington State just a couple weeks ago, and it's interesting. It doesn't involve counterfeiting, but it involves this vape crisis, and the strategy that is used is a very dangerous strategy for the entire industry. So what happened was, maybe you guys read about this, but as a 44-year-old police officer who had been vaping for about a year and a half or so, a handful of products, 8 or 10 products over that time, and using a C-cell vape pen through a U.S. distributor, a Chinese-made pen, and the attorneys brought in everybody, and he vaped. That evening woke up with shortness of breath, went to the hospital, was diagnosed with lipoid pneumonia, so this is the inhaling vaporized oils, and the attorneys sued everybody. And what they're using is the asbestos playbook, it's the tobacco playbook, it's the toxic tort playbook. So the classic example would be the old Navy soldier, a sailor, who was on a ship in Vietnam and exposed to asbestos in the boilers, and then he went and became a construction worker for 30 years and worked on all these different buildings and developed asbestosis. The attorneys go, well, geez, we don't know when you developed it or how often you were exposed to it, but we're going to bring 300 defendants into this lawsuit and shift the burden to the defendants. And the defendants, you guys figure out, who's responsible and who's not, and what the apportionment should be, or the jury will do for you. And that's the playbook. Now, it's a smaller group of defendants, but in the absence of a true medical causation, a true medical cause, it's a very dangerous thing, and I think we're probably going to see more of this stuff. Now, in terms of the answer to the counterfeiting, I think it's really coming up with standards and educating consumers as to how to identify illicit products and staying away from illicit products. Understanding that in fact the regulated market is safer. But aside from that, without consumer education, the illicit market is going to continue to grow.
Well, let's just jump right into consumer education then. Is the state doing their job in educating consumers on how to identify regulated operators versus illicit operators? Go for it.
I think there's a lot more the state could be doing. Josh and I were just talking about this earlier. I'd love to see some sort of transparency, potentially using metric for consumers to be able to look up batch ID numbers and understand if those are legitimate. CCI has this great resource about how to identify counterfeit cartridges, and one of the points on there is does it have a lot number, batch ID number? And well, if it doesn't have one at all, that's a big red flag. But what we're seeing on some of these counterfeit products is that they do have batch numbers, but the consumer has no way of verifying if that's a legitimate batch number. So that's a place where the state could step in and allow, some transparency into the supply chain for consumers, or, at least with the testing data. Like our laboratory, we have, QR codes and things that producers can put on their products that consumers can scan and verify that the testing data is legitimate. And the test results, when we're doing the sampling, we have to collect all the batch data and the batch information. So all that information ends up on the COA. So I'm also not opposed to something like that being a little bit more transparent, where consumers can actually view that data, can scan something or look something up from a package. But I really would like to see that from the state level as well. I think the industry is probably going to have to spearhead that. But it would be nice to have sort of, official regulatory support there.
The industry's getting used to spearheading.
Yeah, we do that a lot. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest failings of both the state and the local regulators is the complete lack of public education of what even this licensed market is and how to tell a licensed business from an unlicensed business. The state's lookup tool for a licensed retailer is very hard to use, complicated. Same for the city of LA. So the names don't always match up, the locations are changing. The city and the county here have been looking at developing what they're calling an emblem. It's like an iconic symbol for licensed retailers to display in their window to say, hey, I'm a licensed retailer, and they have a QR code. Of course, you get counterfeit versions of those. But they're also, the city had been, allocated money to do a public education campaign. But I think we've seen from the way the state spent their money, and then how just governments spend money in general, it's usually not the most effective way. So the industry, I don't think, should wait around for the government to save the day and create an effective public information campaign to explain what this industry is to tens of millions of people. That's only going to come from the industry. I think most other industries have already taken that up, and they do it much more effectively, and they don't have, government agencies leading that cause.
And I think we need to continue to see the BCC be responsive to the leaders who know about these chemicals. So I think my colleague's idea about QR codes and integration with metric and track and trace is a brilliant idea, because this is information that we already have, and we can, quickly develop technology to help consumers understand what they're putting in their bodies, which I think is really, if there's a takeaway about this, it's like we need to help consumers make choices about what they're putting in their bodies and where they're sourcing it from. And then I think we also, from a policy level, we're going to see a lot more enforcement, from the trailer bill. There are much broader enforcement rights from the BCC. So I think there may be more enforcement efforts, and I think we need to think about how we're going to make the market, continue to be accessible for folks who want to enter it.
Yeah, I agree. And, I do want to touch upon, or ask the audience, who here is familiar with the BCC's WeedWise campaign? Oh, this is more than any other room I've been in. And is the messaging effective? As a consumer, do you feel like it resonates with most people? So, I'm just going to go back in history a little bit to kind of talk about where I feel the administration's gone wrong and failed to partner with the cannabis industry, who are experts in how to reach cannabis consumers, how to educate consumers. Our board of directors were a part of the focus group that the BCC used for their education campaign. Our first meeting, we gave feedback. We don't want to use weed anymore, we use cannabis. Don't use pot. We want to, further legitimize this industry. A lot of feedback. The first round of imagery we got was a bud with eyes on it. Like Budman from Ohio. Horrible imagery. And Julie Crockett talked about it at CWCBE, and this is my problem. If you want to know what regulators and legislators think about the industry, just look at that campaign. That's how they view us. We're immature, juvenile, bong-hitting stoners that sit on the couch all day. The last round of imagery that I received a week ago to start sharing with our membership had images of a bird, and it said, Illicit operators sell Dirt Bird. I've never heard of Dirt Bird. I lived in Humboldt County for 10 years. I mean, dirtweed, sure, I know that term, but it was a bird farting. The next message that we were expected to share was, illicit cannabis is spooky. Do you know what ingredients? And it had a ghost. I said this directly to Lori Ajax and said, we will not be sharing this. This is beneath the intelligence level of our members, of consumers, and we need to do a better job. So, missed opportunities.
Just to add to that, I think what's also important about that is it doesn't give anyone any actionable tools to make better choices or informed decisions. Just saying there's Dirt Bird out there, it's like, all right, yeah, okay, there's illicit stuff out there, but how do I recognize it? How do I stay away from it? How do I make sure? And what are the dangers? I think making it real. Fortunately or unfortunately, this vape crisis has sort of brought this to light a little bit more for and it's reaching consumers because of the mainstream media. So hopefully that has some unintended consequences, I think, of sending people, maybe scaring them a little bit towards the regulated market. But that's been sort of my personal disappointment with the Weedwise campaign is like, they've got that pixelated bud, do you know what's in your bud? But again, okay, well, how do I deal with that? And where do I go to get safe product? And how do I make sure that those, retailers are, operating properly?
Has my local city and county given me the ability to purchase from the regulated marketplace instead of operating in the ban?
Right.
But that brings me to a new opportunity that we have. Governor Newsom did hold a press conference almost 3 weeks ago at this point, addressing the issue. He gave an executive order that has two main parts to it. One is for the Department of Public Health, allocating $20+ million for a new education campaign, and recommendations. Those recommendations were due yesterday, but that's not a hard stop, as Nicole Elliott has given us. They just want as many recommendations as possible. The other piece of that is CDTFA. CDTFA is being tasked with addressing the counterfeit market, and they are looking for recommendations from the industry. So since then, they have had a few listening sessions. I know they did one down here in LA. I attended two in Sacramento, so the industry was represented. We definitely addressed the issue of the education campaign and how it needed to be more targeted, that clearly we were missing reaching the right consumers, educating folks on the regulated market. But they're really looking for short-term decisions or short-term priorities right now that the industry would recommend. Not necessarily new regulations, not necessarily legislation. That'll all happen in 2020 when the legislature returns. So I'm wondering what each of you would recommend as far as short-term solutions to deal with the governor's executive order. Well, I can just say we've been having meetings nonstop. At CCIA, we've created a subcommittee of our board of directors. We meet every single day. We are also working with EASE, MPP, UCBA, a lot of unlikely partners that are finally getting together and unifying around this issue to make sure we're doing our job to educate legislators, to come up with recommendations that can be implemented immediately. A lot of that collateral is on the back table there. Our IP committee did put out 2 counterfeit papers that they are now circulating amongst the legislature. We do have a counterfeit campaign on how to identify counterfeit vape products. But some of the things that we're already talking about, strengthening a consumer education campaign, but really bringing the industry into it. Again, we are the experts that can advise, that can give, our experience and, put that towards the campaigns. Yvette, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. We already have things in place for counterfeiting. You and I were having this conversation earlier, and when you look at our district attorney associations, there are counterfeiting teams in place already. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's one of those things where their counterfeiting unit now can take on the counterfeiting unit with the vaping pens and all of that good stuff. It's already here. And we keep trying to reinvent a wheel. For what reason? It's here. Exercise what we have already. And I think, Alex, you can probably speak to that as well, you know, coming from your background. It's here. So we don't have to do anything
The
spectacular.
key to unlock it is always just the money.
Yeah.
Is that yeah, the tools are there. So for LA, 2018, there was barely any LAPD enforcement because they cut all the funding. Starting July 1st this year, they made $10 million available. All of a sudden, every cop in LA wants to raid a dispensary. And it's just, that's how government works. It's, you give them resources, they will spend it. If you don't give them the resources, they're not going to enforce those powers because it just requires them to not enforce the other responsibilities that are handed to them. So, very important that in all these conversations you're having with policymakers, elected officials, it's always about funding. It comes back to that. You can create the best policy in the world. If you don't give an agency the funding, they're going to say, sorry, we can't do it.
And I'll add, I've seen civil actions brought by private, citizens as opposed to a law enforcement angle. And the most successful anti-counterfeiting cases, and we litigate a lot of them, are the ones in which you've identified, including counterfeits that are being brought into the United States from somewhere else. You can usually identify a bank account, something to do with the money in the United States. And if you can identify that asset at a U.S. bank account, it becomes a lot easier to disincentivize that type of conduct. So, money on the civil side as well as the criminal and law enforcement side.
I think just on the education campaign, I'd love to see them focus on what makes legal weed, cannabis, whatever, better. Maybe focus on the fact that legal cannabis is, every batch of it's tested for 66 pesticides. Or that to be an outdoor grower in Humboldt County or really anywhere in the state, you've got to pass rigorous, water board requirements so that we're making sure that this product is produced in a way that's sustainable and not, disrupting the ecosystems of our watersheds and whatnot. So I think, again, like Josh was saying, really elevating the education piece and sort of the simplistic illicit weed is scary is just not effective at all. And so let's focus on why legal cannabis is safer and better.
And as I said, this issue is morphing every day and new things come to light. And one of the issues that has really kind of boggled me is that we're starting to see operators that have hands in both markets, the illicit market and the regulated market. I wasn't so familiar with that, to be quite honest with you, but enough reports are coming out right now highlighting that the difficulty, the barriers to entry, the cost are really forcing a lot of operators to go the route, if their product doesn't pass through testing, to get it onto the illicit market. So, I'm wondering if you've seen that in your testing lab and know that, and then how do you advise any folks that are doing that, and what are the ramifications?
Well, I think that this issue or this phenomenon of compliance versus growth is something that's more and more seen at management level of cannabis companies. As they enter new markets and they have to create brand new supply chains and new business partners and satisfy investors and do all those things. Are they going to be fully compliant or are they going to grow? And then are they going to take that additional step and really, aside from doing strict compliance with regs, actually enter the illicit market? And now we're seeing that happen. So I think it's just to some extent human nature. But that creates substantial management liability and D&O issues. These companies largely are bare in terms of the insurance coverage that they have for that. There are huge exposures from their investors, for example. Not to mention criminal penalties and their civil enforcement. The plaintiff's bar is becoming more and more wise to companies that are not playing by the rules, and I think we'll see more. Not just consumer class actions, but competitor lawsuits, Lanham Act type cases. It's a federal statute that allows competitors to sue other companies in the same space for taking unfair advantage of you know, I do think we're gonna see more and more. Have you seen it?
I think, well, yes, we've definitely seen it. I think simply we need to incentivize consumers to go towards the legal regulated market, and one of the easiest ways we can do that is make it affordable. I think that's one of the big reasons we're still seeing such a healthy black market, is because it's ridiculously expensive to purchase legal regulated products, and then with the patchwork of different tax structures throughout the state, you know, you can buy a product in a dispensary in one city, and then the next city over it could be, you know, 10, 20, 30% more expensive because of that local municipality's, you know, tax structure. So I think, you know, that is a big thing in general. And then, as Josh said, providing greater access. You know, these cities that have that have just all-out cannabis business bans, even if the majority of their voters, you know, voted for Prop 64, is ridiculous, and it's abhorrent, if I do say so myself.
Can I say one more thing? Just from a risk management standpoint, for companies that learn that this has happened or that suspect that something like this has happened, from a corporate governance standpoint, it's really important that the company take action, whether that's the board of directors or, you know, one of the officers of the company. And you know, typically what you would want to do is to have an investigation done. You know, often that's best to have it done by some outside neutral third party, and take action, because you know it doesn't fully insulate you from liability, but it'll certainly help if there's a lawsuit or some penalties coming down the road.
I think for the companies that are kind of trying to play in the gray market right now, they're getting off easy because the state, and certainly here in LA, DCR is not doing any real regulation of the licensed or supposedly licensed operators, the hundreds of non-retailers. So they're not going in there and saying, where is this product going, show us your records. They don't have access to track and trace. So right now it's so easy. But in a year or two, they're going to come in, and there's going to be people who are found out, and they're not going to have proof of where all this product is going, and they're going to start losing their license. So it's tempting right now because it solves your problem in the present, but you're setting yourself up for your entire business to be taken away from you essentially in a few years from now, once the regulators actually figure out how to enforce these rules.
Yeah, I concur with my colleagues. I mean, I think that what may be good for the short term in terms of profit will be incredibly dangerous long term once regulators begin to really evaluate track and trace. So there's got to be a
One more question, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience for a little Q&A for the final few minutes. But LA is the largest cannabis market in the world. Yet LA County, unincorporated Los Angeles, remains in a full ban. Residents of the city of Los Angeles have minimal access to regulated retail and delivery services, in turn giving most folks the only option of the illicit market. What can the industry be doing to change that?
Well, in the city of LA, it's like, you know, we finally started getting closer to bringing new retailers online. It's still not there yet. For the unincorporated areas of LA County, that's really got to wait until Herb Wesson, if he gets elected as county supervisors, goes in and basically tries to take LA's model, the city of LA's model, for the unincorporated areas. For these other 80 or so cities in the LA County that haven't legalized it, it's probably in this patchwork of you got to do ballot measures or elect elected officials, and the key is don't make the licensing system so complicated that once you pass it, you're going to wait 2 more years to bring any new retailers on. And that we're in 2022 and you're finally getting, that's what we've had in LA. We're almost 2 years into it, and not a single new retailer has come online in the city. It's probably going to be at least 3 or 4 months before we even get the first. So 2 years. So if you haven't even started the ballot measure or working in elected officials through the legislative route, and you've seen what happens when you take the existing models of legislation. We have these fights over limited licenses, and we try to create over-regulation for the licensing process. So keep it bare minimum, get people a license, figure out how to regulate them afterwards, but let the market grow and grow with it as regulators.
Yeah, I think this is a really significant political problem, and this is where I really appreciate the work that the CCIA has done. You know, if you care about increasing access to cannabis, making this industry more sustainable, helping to make sure that in LA County, we have access to legal compliant cannabis. Start talking to your local electeds. I'm a local elected in Santa Monica, and I know, I mean, I can tell you, it really matters when your constituents say, hey, this is really important to me, I want you to make this an issue. There can be ordinances passed, like regulations that are passed, but it requires people going to city council, give public testimony. If you haven't done that before, talk to someone who has, talk to folks here who have, learn how you can participate in the public process and really impact legislation, because it does require some mobilization on the ground of folks who are really the experts in the industry.
And when this industry realizes our united political power, we will overturn all of these bans. We will finally reach our full potential as a cannabis industry in California and the nation. So I encourage everyone to stay engaged. This is a very political issue. Though we passed Prop 64 in 2016, it continues to be an area that folks don't really want the education. Legislators are afraid to touch, so stay engaged. With that, any questions?
I actually have a statement. I'm
Sure.
Joan Irvine, CCIA member. I've been involved in online youth safety technology for age-restricted industries since 2002. Last night, I went to a meeting that my assembly member, Al Merashishi, put on. And it was at the school, and it was about teen vaping. And I have, if people want a copy of it, I have a video that somebody put online. It was the most frightening thing from our industry perspective. Because first of all, they're going, what do we do? Well, we're gonna ban all smoking everywhere in cities like Manhattan Beach did. So that was one of the things they said. They did not want to hear that there was a difference between Juul and vaping and THC. They did not want to hear that there is counterfeit and and good stuff. It was just, they did not want to hear any of that. And they had the kids talk about how they were getting it online, and it was, I was shocked, and I got up and I talked, and I said, okay, I've been involved in this for this many years. Here's what we did for, another age-restricted industry, got awards from Jane Harmon and things like that. And I said, please come talk to me, I'm available. Not one person there came and talked to me. I mean, I went and I talked to them all, and somebody brought up about the delivery and saying, no, it's just being dropped at the door. The kids can order it. And the kid, and it's like, oh, and age verification is terrible. I left there just going, so if you want a copy of this, you can see what they're talking about in schools. Al Merashishi said, well, I did not vote for 64. I was against 64. So he was not showing it any support at all. And this is what they are doing in our school system and with the parents and the kids, and they're just not seeing the difference. And once you start selling, once the kids are getting this stuff, that's what Juul, the whole problem with Juul is, it was geared the marketing toward underage, and they're just not seeing the difference. So, and you have to protect, the children, and they're going to try to destroy this industry because of that.
I think there's that's a great comment, and certainly I'm seeing that a lot from my corporate insurance clients even, and there's multiple layers of conflation. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance because people do have this emotional, and rightly so, an emotional reaction to kids being targeted with tobacco products. I've got two kids in elementary and middle school, and it's I'm in my middle school seeing this problem already, and so, but we have to separate that. And I'll tell you what I don't have any short-term solutions, but what I do advise, especially my insurance clients, is to sort of, talk them off the ledge of making irrational decisions based on speculation, particularly when it involves these medical issues, because we don't know yet. You got to let the CDC and the FDA do their job, and then the state health departments, and it's going to take some time. But in the meantime, I think that the industry has to sort of suck it up and just stand tight and not make speculative decisions. And the problem is that we've got this ham-fisted policy response because of the multiple layers of inflation, both the illicit market versus legal market on THC, the THC versus nicotine, short-term versus long-term. I mean, it's a mess, and it's unfortunate that these things are all happening at the same time.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to a question you asked earlier, Josh, about the potential liability for the brands that are being counterfeited. So, what is that potential liability? I mean, if I made a fake Chevy and the brakes failed and it killed someone, they could sue GM.
Yeah,
What's
so
the liability?
if you're a brand and you're on notice that there's a product out there that's using your brand and they're making misrepresentations or it's dangerous, there is potential legal liability on you if you don't take action. You could be sued for basically being negligence theory, a tort theory. That does happen. I mean, there are big kind of multinationals, tire companies, big, consumer product companies that are aware of, knockoffs that are being sold that are harming people. And if they don't take action, either working through the government or trying to, send cease and desist letters or otherwise suing those companies, doing what they can. We've got Vic back in the room here, and they do a great job. We've worked with Vic in the past. Vic has, there are knockoff Vic lighters all around the world, and they take action. They have to take action because if they don't, they can get sued.
We'll do one more question. Yeah.
Can you address the CBD black market? That's $1 billion. How much of that is fake? Do you know?
That's interesting. I think there's a comment on a panel earlier about how much easier it is to get coverage for CBD or hemp products as opposed to cannabis. And I think that's kind of ironic because there's very little regulation at all in the CBD industry. The cannabis industry is so much more regulated. I mean, when it comes to testing, we've tested products labeled with CBD claims that literally have absolutely no CBD in them at all. And they're being sold for, outrageous prices, right? So I think consumers are vulnerable in that market, and I think we're working towards probably seeing CBD, some regulations coming to the CBD industry, but CBD hemp industry. But yeah, it's anytime someone asks me, I'm interested in trying CBD, and like I saw this stuff online, I'm like, no, go to a cannabis dispensary to get a CBD product. Even if you don't want any THC, there's options out there originating from cannabis that are going to be consistent, tested, reliable, held to the standards that cannabis products are. Because exactly right, there's a big billion-dollar market out there with absolutely no regulation, and that's scary.
Yeah, right now, the official word from the FDA, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, California Department of Public Health, is that hemp-derived CBD is not approved for human consumption right now. So if you're looking at these, if you're looking at these, I'm talking about hemp-derived CBD as opposed to cannabis-derived CBD. So if you're looking at that type of product and you're looking at the FDA guidance, right? It's very difficult to be working in an industry that's operating in a very gray area where industrial hemp was obviously removed, subject to certain limitations from the controlled substances list. But now the FDA is really struggling on how to improve the use of industrial hemp-derived CBD in products for human consumption. There's some really informative warning letters about what the FDA is saying in terms of who they're kind of cracking down on for hemp-derived CBD. There was AB 228, which was a bill that would have regulated industrial hemp-derived CBD. That failed. We're really looking for regulatory guidance, I think, at this point in terms of how hemp-derived CBD is going to be treated, how it's going to be regulated, and how we're going to provide consumers with kind of the same regulatory support and information that we do in the cannabis market. It's such a different market, it's almost mind-blowing.
Thank you to this panel. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to CCIA staff, the HR, the insurance committee for putting this together. Do stick around. We do have a networking reception now. We'll all be hanging out for questions. So again, thank you all very much.